Debbie, and I want to take a moment to show my lab results and how we combine that with genetics. Remember, genetics are not your destiny. It's the epigenetics are the combination of our lifestyle habits. And I'm trying to help you, the active individual, understand that we're the other side of that bell curve. Sedentary, the right amount of exercise for that positive effect response. And then we've got the other side, over exercising, doing a little too much, creating too much oxidative stress. So to be healthy from the inside out, you may look good and lean and strong, but what's going on inside? We don't know unless we do specific lab testing, and your doctor's ranges that you get from the labs are so huge. And so when I look at labs, I'm not a doctor, but a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, FDN, and also a nutritional therapy practitioner, where we look at building the foundations first. And identifying hidden stressors with these labs can really help us optimize our health at a cellular level, working on nutrition first, how we eat, when, why, what, how to exercise, the right intensity, duration, frequency. But remember, the exercise, we break that up, is there's also movement. So the exercise part, I would say, zone 2, HIIT training, sit training, and then there's heavy strength training in the exercise category. We also have another category called movement, and I'd add mobility in there, moving throughout the day, not sitting too long, just moving every hour, get up, do something. And then we've got digestion and gut health and all the other elements I talk about in the holistic method. But let's do a little check-in on my report I have from the Clarity report. And what I found interesting is looking at this report you get from Wild Health. Cardiovascular disease risk is one of the reports. I have a 1.2%, but my dad passed away of heart disease, kidney failure. I swear he was probably insulin resistant, but they would not test his insulin because he wasn't diabetic, which is absolutely ridiculous. And really looking at what are genetic risks. But look, here's my risk where I am now. But look at my genetics. I have a lot of lifestyle nutrition habits I want to address to avoid having cardiovascular disease. So I have the risk factors for genetics. Now, would I know that if I didn't do genetics? Maybe not. Maybe assume my dad had heart disease because he was always stressed out and sedentary. He was working all day and would come home and have a cocktail, and then they'd have dinner, and then they're sitting watching TV. So the standard American lifestyle is not getting outside, getting your vitamin D from the sun, and getting out for nice walks and moving throughout the day. We end up sitting, we're inside, and we're not getting many steps and eating good food and too much alcohol. So here what the markers are on the left, lipids that they use at Wild Health in their Clarity report. I am going to go get new labs next week, but I just wanted to show you, this is from February, total cholesterol, my LDL, HDL, triglycerides, LPP, LP little a, APOB. Those two weren't checked, but I added those on this time. Inflammation markers, they look at what is your CRP. And that's a big one we want to look at for inflammation. Oh my gosh, I have so many ants crawling in front of me, hate ants. So we want to look at all these markers. Now, chronic disease risks, I have the genetic SNPs, 2 risk alleles. So you get one from your mother, one from your father. I got one from both, so I have 2 ACE. So that is the enzymes converting SNP angiotensin. So that's increased risk of high blood pressure, greater risk for diabetes, increased risk for cardiovascular disease. Risk mitigated by reducing saturated fat. So kind of looking at these patterns here. Now, chronic disease, dementia, here's my insulin resistance score. And they're looking at homocysteine, where we want under 7, testosterone, estrogen. I'm 52, still having a cycle, not in menopause, but this is my estrogen's low. and thyroid stimulating hormone, free T4. There's no T3, and I asked for that to be retested because T3 is the active form of thyroid. T4 is inactive. Vitamin D, even though I swim every day or 3 days a week, 4 days in the sunshine at noon in Solana Beach, my vitamin D should be 60 to 80 is optimal for us. And I'm still at 43 and I'm outside in a swimsuit. So this needs to be improved. Omega-3, I'm doing all this stuff next test. So that's just what you want to look at. And here's the genetic SNPs I have. Green, we're good. And then the orange is the worst, and yellow is kind of the middle BDNF. So then your APOE status, I'm at 3.3. So that gives you information on that towards dementia. So we want to take our health in our own hands. I always say, you know, being a health optimizer, doing what you can now, especially at 50, even as you get in your 40s, we want to start preparing for our future self. If you are my age, you might have parents in their 80s and watching what happens to them and all their friends, because they might not have done all this stuff early on because we didn't know that back then. So now there's so much we can do, control, and how we can improve the aging process by getting this data. So looking at my risks for dementia, you know, my CRP, I have 2 risks, alleles, I never know how to say that right, but this heightened risk for inflammation, monitor my CRP, A to G ratio, closely treat causes of inflammation. So, but remember, my CRP is pretty low, 0.15, but I have 2 genetic SNPs against it from each parent, so I need to be careful. Homocysteine marker is elevated, so I want to make sure I'm taking methylated folate, B vitamins, choline. Estradiol is low because I'm getting older. I need to get some hormone replacement therapy, maybe. And then this one, I have 2 risk markers. Interleukin, oh wait, what's this one? Yeah, interleukin 1B polymorphism, higher neuroinflammation, less cognitive benefit from ketosis. So ketosis may not be what I need to do. So something to think about when we put all the pieces of the puzzle together. So chronic disease, insulin resistance, and insulin is a hormone made by the pancreas responsible for transporting glucose from your bloodstream into the cell. So think of insulin is needed as a key to open up the door of the cell wall so glucose can shuttle in. That's why exercise is so magical, because you can increase GLUT4 transporter to get glucose in the cell. Now, insulin resistance is reduced effectiveness of insulin. So if you keep knocking at that door, over time, we're going to get tired of opening it for you. So we're not going to let you in. We're full, we don't want any more, or we're just become, what they say, resistant to it. So there's different theories. Wild Health talks about this suitcase theory. So if your suitcases are filled with too many clothes, Dr. Gabrielle Lyon talks about this too, that the cells are full of glucose. Now, I was listening to Dr. Ben Bickman doing a YouTube video on having low glucose in your cells because you can't get glucose into the cells. So there's a couple different ways you can go: hypo or hyper, too much or too little. It becomes harder to fit glucose in the cells, and the insulin doesn't work as well. So treatment for reducing glucose, the consumption of glucose, is a solution. But this is what I want to dive into today in a future episode: is if insulin resistance goes unchecked, it'll lead to pre-diabetes and can lead to full-blown type 2 diabetes. So here are what the suggestions are in all these articles I keep reading. Low carb fasting to reduce the glucose in the cells, because the longer you fast, you're more depleting the glycogen stores in your suitcases. Also, exercise will do that too. So doing more glycogen depleting workouts as zone 3, 4, and 5 will deplete that glycogen storage. So you can do fasting or exercise. We're often choosing exercise. So exercise increases glucose utilization. We also want to maximize our sleep quality, deep sleep and REM sleep, because that's your recovery, repair, and detoxification. Sleep hormone optimization to optimize insulin effectiveness. So we'll try to get some guests on the show to talk about sleep and insulin. But here are my markers. Here are the genetic SNPs I have. Look at, I've got the obesity gene, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So if I didn't exercise and get into health and nutrition since college, high school, I would be super overweight. and struggling with my weight. I do not lose weight easily. It's always a struggle. I've never been petite, only when I was freshman in college and I was not eating. I was more eating disorder type of situation that I wasn't eating and exercising a lot. So I got to be 50 pounds lighter than I am now, so which was not very good. Don't recommend that. Fasting glucose 90, insulin is 4.3. So we want insulin under 5, right? So insulin, let's go to my cheat sheets for you. We want to get insulin and your A1C we want to look at. So often Dr. William Davis says your A1C should be under 5%, and your glucose we want to look at. They also look at ferritin, triglycerides, HDL ratio, and there's my A1Cs too high. So why is that? If I'm not eating a lot of sugar or any sugar, I'm not eating a high carb diet, I am having some carbs. I'm meat-based, but not strict carnivore. But what I want to share with you, if you are very stressed out, having chronic stress outside, and then you have chronic stress internally, it accumulates. Cortisol, glucose, insulin, and we have pancreas, adrenal, liver, we call the fowls. They're going to be all overworked. So we need to look at this insulin resistance. Maybe your low carb and fasting isn't necessary, but it's sleep and hormone optimization. If your estrogen's low, if your cortisol is high or low, if your thyroid is low, that is what I'm finding can impact your insulin resistance. Then we look at genetics. I have 2 risk alleles for this SNP called insulin resistance S1, IRS1. So I have an increased risk for insulin resistance and diabetes in response, get this, to a high fat diet. This is where it gets totally confusing. So I'm trying to look at the SNPs there's different numbers basically of each gene. And some refer to a low carb, high fat diet, and others refer to high fat, low carb, vice versa. Right? I said the same thing twice, but you want to look at, do you do better genetically at a high carb, low fat diet, optimizing protein first, carbs with a low fat diet. So this gets confusing because we'll go back to the report at the top of my carbs. So if I am looking at insulin resistance scores moderate, should I fast 16-8? Should I consider high fat, low carb diet ketogenic depending on my genetics, which are not good for that? So regular exercise, I know how to do that. Glucose monitoring. I'm not a fan of metformin as much as taking the berberine, as Sean Wells talks about, the berberine. Magnesium, but I have evidence of insulin resistance in my lab. So looking at moderate insulin resistance, consider changes in insulin resistance, reducing carbs, right? So we want to see magnesium before bed for glucose metabolism. But if we go all the way back to the beginning of my report, you can see my carb tolerance is in the middle, saturated fats in the middle, based on all these genetic SNPs. So fat tolerance, I'm okay with, but saturated fat, I need to maybe limit. So doing a moderate carb, I'm not great with carbs, but I'm not horrible. So more lower to moderate. But then I have the genetic SNPs that might do better with, moderate carbs than low carb. So that's why we need to really personalize what is best for you when we look at your nutrition and exercise plan, and then put this with your labs and looking at modern day markers are not the LDL, HDL. Now we look at a little bit more on the ApoB, ApoA, and LP(a), which I'm learning about. So then we have exercise recovery, my strength, endurance, slow to fast. This is where I feel I do better running less per week, maybe twice a week, 3 times a week, and can perform better in my long run if I just run once on the weekend and then a short run during the week. Low intensity versus high intensity. I'm great at zone 2. since I started training 25 years ago in endurance sports. I excel down at the long distance. High intensity, I'm not so great at. But over here, strength is more my preference versus endurance. So then I can create my exercise program based on my genetic predisposition for strength versus endurance, rate of recovery, and intensity tolerance. So interesting how you can personalize a plan, looking at my recovery times, intermediate, and all this information. So that's what we do with the Clarity Report, self-decode as a new program as well. But in the DNA company we've looked at, but I like the report from Clarity. They're no longer going to have the blood chemistry in there as well when I order it for my clients. So we'll have to do that separately. But the microbiome can add in the data here. And then down at the bottom, I want to show you, the risk for chronic diseases. We went over this part, but see, this is what I think is important to be a health optimizer. Just because you're fit and healthy on the outside, I don't have this risk now, but my genetic risk is high. So we want to look at that. So we're going to go over some information in a few episodes on insulin resistance, the role of hormones in there, how to calculate your insulin, and great information I had in genetics for your insulin resistance. How can you reverse it? The fasting, exercise, nutritional therapy, time restricted eating for us athletes is suggested more of a 12-hour fast, not longer than that, because we want to get those grams of protein per meal. So then I put together this insulin resistance, chronic stress, and hormones. So looking at our role of estrogen and how that has an impact on our insulin sensitivities, looking at the role of why am I gaining weight as I age. We're going to look at inflammation, muscle mass, your activity level, and solutions. So then we can look at low thyroid, I have low cortisol, and insulin resistance, but I'm doing all the right things. What's wrong? So then we want to look at, I just did my genetics, and then we're looking at the thyroid T3, T4 that's available, free T4, T3. We want to look at why am I not getting glucose into the cells? What's slowing down because of the slow metabolism coming from the low thyroid that's slow. So just think of thyroid that's low as putting the brakes on everything. So we have decreased insulin clearance. So the rate of which insulin is removed from the bloodstream by the liver and kidneys. Oh my gosh, I have ants crawling on my feet. And looking at the health of your liver is really important too. So why do we get fat when we have elevated insulin? It promotes fat storage, lipogenesis. It inhibits the fat breakdown, lipolysis, alters energy utilization using glucose instead of fat. When insulin is high, the cells primarily use glucose for energy, which reduces fatty acid oxidation, reduces the ability to make ketones in the liver. Ketone bodies from fatty acids for alternate energy source. Regulation of your appetite, satiety, metabolism. So we want to look at all these different things. So we want to look at metabolic inflexibility. I'm using the lumen to help figure out, should I eat or not eat? What type of workout should I do? What information. I found this one strategy is metabolic health. But also when I do metabolic testing, we're looking at all these markers when I do a PNOE test. So pillars of longevity, heart health, mental health, cellular, lung, posture. This is our report that when I do your resting metabolic rate, we're going to find out metabolic fitness, fat burning efficiency, heart, as well as the breathing markers. So if you need to improve, for example, metabolic fitness, how well your body converts fats and carbs into energy, that's measured by combining your resting metabolic rate and the fat burning efficiency scores. How do you improve it? We go over what are you not doing? How do we need to prove it? Low intensity, steady state training improves mitochondria function, and that enhances fat burning. So if you go back to my other videos, I've been doing the slides on mitochondria. Resistance training, that increases your metabolic rate. High intensity zone 5 improves mitochondria density. So how many mitochondria you have in a cell is improve interval training. Endurance, on the other hand, is improving mitochondria function. So how do we get our sleep and avoid overeating, reducing stress? All these other lifestyle markers make a difference. So if you want to learn more, if you do kind of do all the right things, but you can't figure it out, let's investigate. We want to start testing and stop guessing. And what I do is kind of more health investigator, put all the missing pieces of your health puzzle together by spending hours kind of digging into everything. Also, the Lumen device is a breath device to measure, am I in fat or carb burn? And I keep being in carb burn. So what do I need to do differently to start to see more fat burning? So putting all this information together, looking at your Aura or your Whoop or your Garmin, CGM, what is your reason for collecting all this stuff? Because you're listening to all these videos and all these podcasts. Less is more is my mantra as I get older. You shouldn't need to take 20, 30 supplements. We want to figure out what should you do based on where are you right now, what's working, what's not working, what are you doing for those nutrition habits? Are you eating enough? Are you getting the protein goals every meal? It's hard. Are you eating clean, nutrient-dense whole foods, or are you cheating all the time? Are you skipping meals and not eating enough and having low energy availability? Are you training too hard? You're doing everything in zone 3, 4, and 5, burning carbs. You're not doing any zone 2 to get more mitochondria, creating more mitochondria's biogenesis. So we want to really get a personalized program. N equals 1. It's a journey. It's not a race. And so I think it's really important to figure out what you're doing. Why are you getting all this stuff? How are you changing your daily routine and workout program based on your data you're collecting? This is an estimate. You really want to know heart rate variability? Put a chest strap on. So more to dive into. I'm going to talk about oxidative stress. We're doing an interview with Aura Wellness, talking about glutathione and the role of antioxidants in our liver for recovery and repair. Antioxidants are important for us athletes. And what exercise promotes too much oxidative stress? If you're doing all that hard workout, are you balancing that oxidative stress with antioxidants? So let me know what your thoughts are, what you want to learn more of. I've been diving deep in these different rabbit holes, but I'm here to help you be fit and healthy from the inside out as you age. So if you want to join me, hit subscribe and we will continue learning how we can be the best version of ourselves in our second half of our life and thrive when we are 80, 90, 100 years old. Talk to you soon.